Welcome in, guys. Welcome in. How is everyone doing? I know there's a few seconds left on the ad break, but for those who miss quits, my buddy, you know what? I keep saying I'm not gonna do it, but fuck it. This is this is. It sounds weird. I'm older than you by almost 10 years, but this is my dad and my PNG. Does it make you happy? Huh? Huh? I finally said it. It's probably gonna be the only time. Enjoy it while it lasts. You're gonna clip it, aren't you? You butt.
With le papa.
Yeah. Yeah. Thought so. I knew it.
I'm sorry, what did I miss?
I said Misquits was the father of my PNG. So I said it's the only time I'm gonna say it. Enjoy your lurk, Neko. Nice. Shush, panda. Shush.
Hi, Neko.
Yeah. Hey, Neko.
Neko. Hugsies.
Well, you do know that you can give
Howdy,
hugs in chat,
everyone.
right? Just exclamation point, hug, space, at, and the person's name. You were just there, Panda. What else do you have to do? Thank you, Neko. You're so amazing too, and you're also so cute too. By the way, let's just let's check it.
Bing bong.
Let's see. 31% sussy, 60, nice. 69% stinky and 93% chaotic. All right. Occult is 89 chaotic. Nice. So
96%
Nice.
stinky.
Noise.
wait a
I'm
minute.
69% stinky.
Me too. High five.
Woo!
So
And 89 chaotic.
yeah.
Damn.
Hey, DJ turned on his unique badge thingy. Woo! Thank you for that, DJ. Cause
That
I
was
went I
that
went
was an
through the
automatic thing because I didn't do that on
some
purpose.
somebody did something where it can actually change. Okay, well it's on my OBS, so I don't know if it's actually in. Yeah, it is.
Oh, it's
Okay,
an
sweet.
axolotl.
Yes,
It's
yes it is.
adorable.
I literally went through the thing and actually did it where I'm trying to make it as adorable and stuff. I You broke the bot because there's no way you're sussier than that. DJ, um, yeah. So, yeah, anyway, so I was reading Nightmare Before Christmas and then I realized I was supposed to read this with Neko, and Neko, I am so sorry. Put that in clips from stream. Put it in clips from stream. Misquits, go for it. Go into the cafe, put it in clips from stream. You earned this. But I'm not going to say it again. All right?
What are you gonna say again?
Exactly. You have to go to clip from stream to
Damn
see it.
it.
Nice try. Ma'am, don't try to get
What?
your mother. You know what? You're my child, and you learn this shit from me. Nice try. It's not happening. Mm,
It's not.
mm.
Gotta
Yes, Dragon
gotta
King
plug my
is
phone in that way
chaotic.
I can keep your stream going.
So,
Um,
but yeah. How is everybody? Cafe, you bitch. Oh my god, honey.
What? What did he do? Is it that he went live?
How dare? How dare? Okay, I got one of them. That's all that matters.
Shit, I missed.
Yes, you did. Deal with it. Which, by the way, in the cafe or whatever, the new thing, I got him that stream package. I thought it would be so cute. Um,
Oh, that is adorable.
yes, Miss Quits, you are more chaotic than that. Hey, you're very stinky, Panda. You're stinkier than I am. Anyway, so so far in Nightmare Before Christmas, we've it's I mean, what can I say? It's literally the movie in the book. Um, I just have to remind myself sometimes not to sing because it's too easy.
This
It's
This
too
is
easy.
Halloween.
Halloween. This is Halloween.
I mean, that's the it's literally the lo-fi is the intro. So, yeah. Um, but it was so easy. I could have done it because it literally has parts of the song in there. But so it's been going through the movie and we're at the point where Lock, Shock and Barrel just captured the Easter Bunny. Jack is ripping into him. Go get Santa Claus. You got the wrong one. So, yeah.
I should read the Warhammer novels.
And literally the last thing that happened is you have Dr. Finkelstein. Actually, well, the last thing that happened, yeah, everyone's getting their jobs and stuff, and Dr. Finkelstein is like, so Jack wants flying reindeer? Very well. I'll make the fiercest beast that ever stalked the stars. So, the clock in Town Hall's tower counted off the 12 months of the year instead of the 12 hours in a day. For a year now, the residents of Halloween Town had watched the clock's bat-wing hands sweep in a steady circle as days came and went in a flurry of garland stringing and present wrapping. The clock's hands passed October 31st with no scares, no dancing scarecrows, no nightmares. For the first time, Halloween Town had no Halloween. The town barely noticed. Jack's Yuletide excitement was as infectious as smallpox, spreading through the ghoulish population until each undead soul rose early to toil on their Christmas tasks and went to bed grinning because December 25th was one day closer. When only a few weeks remained before the holiday, the vampires pointed out that the Days to Halloween countdown sign, which had hung above the clock for as long as anyone could remember, was no longer applicable. So the undersea gal and Behemoth dragged out a ladder and rigged up a new sign to cover the old one. Days to Xmas. The new sign read in Behemoth's childlike handwriting. Everyone agreed it was a vast improvement. The monster's excitement chatter filled the air as the devil untangled strings of sinister red lights that looked like glowing eyes, while the vampires braved the sunlight beneath umbrellas to deliver cans of paint to the toy makers, who, was, who were busy constructing roadkill teddy bears and possessed dolls with midnight black hair. The clown with the tearaway face packed Pandora's boxes with cute little curses that would haunt the children on Christmas morning. Making Christmas, they exclaimed as they watched the clock's arm move closer to the big date each day. I almost sang that. Sally listened to the sounds of the monster's hard work from behind the heavy drapes of her makeshift sew shop. Once, Dr. Finkelstein had sworn that he was well and truly done with her, and that she was on her own. She'd set to work on Jack's new costume. As the merriment grew more rancorous outside, Sally leaned over her sewing machine, her brow wrinkled in concentration as she ran thread through the red velvet fabric Jack had asked her to use. The drawing of Jack in his Sandy Claus suit hung on the wall behind her sewing table. She told herself it was for reference as she made the suit, but she caught herself staring at it several times a day with a furrowed brow, remembering her vision. Oh, Jack, I wish you'd listened to me. But months had passed, and her vision hadn't come true, and she'd found herself swept up in the same infectious excitement as the rest of the town. It was only whenever she caught sight of the drawing of Jack that she remembered her terrible premonition. He was the Pumpkin King, not Sandy Claus. Why was he trying to be something he wasn't? Was this entire Christmas holiday a terrible mistake? Worry stitched a line through her thoughts as she cut the next segment from her pattern. The chatter grew louder outside her workshop, and she peered out, curious. Jack had arrived in town square to inspect everyone's work. The corpse kid and mummy boy proudly pounded toy cars to smithereens, beaming at him. The children will be so surprised when they open those presents, the corpse kid giggled. Jack patted the corpse kid on the back. Indeed they will. This year, Christmas is ours. Everyone cheered. They were determined to do Christmas right. Who wouldn't want a delightful vampire teddy bear or a game of checkers with scorpions and beetles? Their unique toys and gifts would bring such delight to little boys and girls everywhere. Ghosts carrying poison-laced paints floated up from the wishing well. They passed by the Undead Ensemble's accordion player, who pushed a wheelbarrow full with jack-o'-lanterns that would soon be turned into orange-faced baby dolls. Rats scuttled over the ground with ribbons between their teeth. High up in the castle, overlooking the town square, Dr. Finkelstein and Igor flipped the electrical switch to bring the reindeer corpses to life. As electricity snapped in the air, the doctor raised his small fists in triumph. His excitement got the best of him, and he toppled over onto his desk, knocking into an extra skull Igor had found in the cemetery. He picked it up, marveling at the elegant curvature of the bone. He thought, a beautiful skull for a beautiful lady. Back in the center of town, the mayor drove Jack's snowmobile, carrying their top secret Christmas plans in the attached wagon, while townspeople carried out long wooden tables. When lined up just right, the tables not only served an extra workspace, but also made an elevated ramp. The corpse kid and mummy boy managed to hop onto the snowmobile when the mayor's back was turned and tested out the ramp, knocking the towering mayor right off the platform to the ground. He dusted off his hat, kept grinning. They'll talk about this for years, Jack, the witches purred. A vampire shoved off a present wrapped with a grinning snake. Did you know a snake makes an excellent bow? The other vampires were deep in concentration, painting bullet holes into a possessed wind-up duck. They had spent days selecting the perfect shade of red. They were experts in blood, after all. Look what I made from a dead rat. The Harlequin demon showed a smashed rat carcass he had fashioned into a cap onto the head of the Undead Ensemble's saxophone player, who had reluctantly agreed to be his model. The demon stuck a feather in the hat for an added flourish. The sax player shook his head, regretting his role. Jack tapped a bony finger against his chin as he inspected the Harlequin demon's handiwork. An excellent hat, but perhaps try something less deceased? How about a bat? The Harlequin demon set to work while the sax player rolled his eyes. Jack rubbed his hands together as he moved to the next workstation, where the melting man was about to wrap up a dead turtle he'd run over with the mayor's hearse. Jack took the turtle, gave it a shake, and the head fell off. Try again. Jack patted the melting man's bald head, but his hand stuck and took several tugs to get free. Jack nodded to himself while he watched Dr. Hyde and his demonic miniature alter egos, each one half the size of the next largest, stacking nesting dolls that echoed their diminishing size. My dream is coming true, Jack mused. It's really happening, even if it's not exactly as I envisioned it. The townspeople had come a long way toward embracing the magical Christmas spirit he'd felt when he visited Sandy Claus Town, but they still needed a little more guidance. Jack reminded himself to be patient with them. They'd never seen a sleigh full of presents. They hadn't seen the elves' jolly toy factory. Besides, a snake tied up in a bow seemed perfectly lovely to him. It was much more exciting than a lifeless ribbon, that was for sure. Okay, Dragon King. The clock ticked down another day, and the monsters cheered. Just a few more days, the wolfman howled. In a faraway land, a different song rode on the wind. Making Christmas, the Christmas town elves exclaimed, but instead of talking about snakes and slime, they discussed sugar and spice. Above the elves' toy factory, a clock also ticked down the days until December 25th. The elves worked round the clock, barely stopping for hot cocoa and cookies to meet the holiday deadline. An assembly line cheerfully produced rocking horses painted red and green. Not a single one was known to bite. On the opposite side of the factory, the elves seamstresses peddled oversized sewing machines to make teddy bears that gave hugs, not smallpox. And in the bakery, fleets of bakers mixed sugar and flour for gingerbread men. Not an ounce of poison was added. On the hill overlooking Christmastown, three mischievous trick-or-treaters watched the elves' preparations in disgust. Lock, Shock, and Barrel and their walking bathtub had squeezed through the carved wooden door built into the hinterland's tree and tumbled down a swirling vortex of frosty air to find themselves on a snowy hill overlooking a village that twinkled with holiday lights. They had found the right door at last. Christmastown. Locke started down the mountain. Shock tripped him, just to be nasty. He kicked her in return, and the three of them and the bathtub slid down the hill until they landed with a thud in front of the biggest house in town, with fir-scented smoke puffing out of the chimney and warm candlelight in the windows. They'd never seen anything like this magical land. Over the past few months, they'd explored every other world through the mystical doorways of the hinterland trees. After they'd returned the Easter Bunny to his springtime meadow, they'd frightened baby chicks and smashed decorated eggs. They'd investigated a food fight in Thanksgiving Town, drenching one another with gravy and mashed potatoes. Each world was so wonderfully new and wonderfully easy to terrorize. It had been like taking Halloween candy from a baby. But Christmastown? This was something truly special. Oogie Boogie's gang tiptoed over to peek in the toy factory windows, where they spied on the elves packing up teddy bears. They sneered. Back in Halloween Town, their friends were doing a much better job stuffing boxes with creepy crawly toys. Christmastown's elves fed and groomed 8 robust reindeer, but Lock, Shock, and Barrel all agreed that Dr. Finkelstein's skeleton animals were far superior. They didn't need to be fed at all. The hands on the clock above the toy factory were dangerously close to December 25th. Only 2 days left until Christmas. Enough dilly-dallying. The trick-or-treaters decided. They'd had their fun wreaking havoc on the other holiday towns. Now it was time to capture Sandy Claus, or face Jack's wrath. Shock hissed for the boys to quiet while she peeked into the windows of each cottage. Sleeping children. Elves decorating trees. Ah, at last. She found the right house. Inside, a large man in a red suit was reading aloud a list of children's names to his wife, who helped him decide who had been naughty and who had been nice. It really was him, the legend, the terror, Sandy Claus. Shock elbowed her conspirators to signal for them to put on their masks. Once they were fully in costume, they each clutched a side of their giant black plastic treat bag and snickered to themselves. Shock rang the doorbell. It chimed with a festive melody, and the next moment the door swung open, and they were looking straightway into the rosy-cheeked face of an old devil Sandy Claus. "Trick or treat!" Shock, Lock, and Barrel sang in unison. Sandy Claus' woolly white eyebrows knit together as he leaned down for a closer look at the unfamiliar children. He was quite sure none of those were on the list of nice boys and girls he'd gotten over with Mrs. Claus. "Hmm?" he asked, perplexed. Now, the trick-or-treaters leapt up to throw the bag around Sandy Claus, making quick work of wrestling the confused king of Christmastown into their walking bathtub. As they rode on top of the bag, struggling in the bathtub, Shock, Shock giggled to herself. Naughty or nice? Definitely naughty. Jack admired himself in the full-length mirror in Sally's sewing workshop. The long white beard she'd made of spider silk gave him a dashing, thoughtful air. The red suit fit his narrow bones like a glove, and the white trim at the neck and sleeves was perfect down to the last stitch. "You don't look like yourself, Jack. Not at all," Sally muttered as she sewed a bit more trim onto his sleeve. "Isn't it wonderful?" Jack turned back to the mirror to admire the white trim at the collar. "It couldn't be more wonderful. But you're the Pumpkin King." She unhooked his portrait from the wall and pulled back the wax paper to show Jack as she knew him best, in his black striped suit with his dashing bat bow tie. He took the portrait from her and promptly snapped it in two over his knee. He tossed the pieces to the floor dramatically. Not anymore. I feel so much better now. Sally grumbled uneasily as she finished stitching his left sleeve's trim. Jack, I know you think something's missing, but she was so distracted by the memory of her vision that she jabbed the needle into his finger bone. Ow! On instinct, he popped the hurt finger into his mouth. Sorry, she offered. Jack remembered that as a skeleton, he felt no pain, and took the finger out of his mouth. He admired himself again in the mirror. You're right. Something is missing. But what? I've got the beard, the coat, the boots. Jack! Jack! The mirror reflected something outside the sewing workshop that stole his attention. Before Sally could stop him, he ran out into the town square, where monsters loaded packages into the sleigh they made out of a coffin and a barrel. The skeletal reindeer, draped in festive garlands, danced over the wooden boards of the elevated ramp, eager to take flight. Lock, Shock, and Barrel paraded into the town square, sitting atop an enormous bundle tied up in their walking bathtub. This time we bagged him, the three exclaimed. Lock jumped off the bag and skipped up to Jack. This time we really did. He sure is big, Jack, Barrel said, patting the sack beneath him. And heavy, Shock insisted. She and Lock pulled the rope to open the bag. Immediately, the white-bearded man in a red suit struggled free. Let me out, he demanded in a huff. Gasps filled the air as monsters eyed the fierce king of Christmastown, the terrible Sandy Claus. In the flesh. Jack was the only one who didn't cower before him. Jack turned on his undead charm as he approached the bearded man. Sandy Claus, in person. What a pleasure to meet you. He thrust out his skeletal hand and clutched Sandy Claus' black-gloved one. He gasped in astonishment as he examined the man's petite digits. Why, you have hands. You don't have claws at all. Sandy Claus pushed his red stocking cap back over his aching head. After he had spent so long crammed in that black bag, it took his eyes a minute to adjust. He looked around in a daze. What was this awful place? These monsters? This drab gray sky? These angular buildings that grinned ghoulishly like they were alive? Where am I? He asked, still out of sorts. Beaming, Jack leaned in until he was just a few inches from Sandy's face. Surprised, aren't you? He swept his hands back to show off his town. I knew you would be. You don't need to have another worry about Christmas this year. Sandy Claus felt like he must be trapped in a nightmare. Sticky candies from those three naughty trick-or-treaters were caught in his beard, making a mess of everything. He blinked, considering Jack's words. What? Jack reassuringly rested a hand on Sandy's back. Consider this a vacation, Sandy. A reward. It's your turn to take it easy. He plucked a candy from Sandy Claw's beard. But there must be some mistake, Sandy sputtered. See that he's comfortable, Jack commanded. Lock, Shock, and Barrel. Gleefully, the masked children pounced on Sandy and wrestled him back into the Halloween bag. Just a second, fellas, Jack ordered when Sandy was halfway into the bag. Jack leaned in close, stroking his chin and examining Sandy Claus. Of course. That's what I was missing. He snatched the red cap off Sandy's head and placed it on his own. Thanks, Sandy protested, but you can't just... His voice dimmed as the trick-or-treaters crammed him into the bag and retied the rope. The clawfoot tub stretched its porcelain limbs, then started the walk out of town. Hold on! Sandy's muffled voice came from inside the bag. Where are we going now? Oogie Boogie's gang snickered as they rode atop him. Once Sandy Claus had departed for his restful retreat, Jack stroked the hat. "Ho, ho, ho!" he attempted in a flat voice, then shook his head. No, that didn't sound right at all. He tried again, deeper this time. "Ho, ho, ho!" Sally, wringing her hands, watched outside her sewing workshop. "This is much worse than I thought. Much worse." She pressed her hands to her face. Kidnapping Sandy Claus? He was in incredible danger and with those naughty little children. They'd take him straight to Oogie Boogie's lair. She knew it. Why was Jack letting this happen? Didn't he know better? This whole Christmas thing had simply gone too far. Jack practiced a high-pitched ho ho ho, then shook his head again. Still not perfect. "I know." Sally grabbed her cloth bag and ran out of the sewing workshop, then moved quietly through the streets, though everyone was too busy packing presents in the coffin sleigh to notice the rag doll making her way to Dr. Finkelstein's castle. The castle was the single place in Halloween Town Sally dreaded the most. But try as she might, she couldn't shake the terrible premonition that something awful would come from Jack's obsession with Christmas. Jack wouldn't listen to her, and the other town residents were all too dazzled by his plans to listen, either, so she simply had to take matters into her own hands. She had learned that Dr. Finkelstein kept a key to the castle's front door hidden beneath a little stone gargoyle in the garden. For such a brilliant man, he could be surprisingly forgetful, especially when it came to trivialities like remembering to take his keys with him when he left. A cold feeling overcame her as she tiptoed along the outside of the castle. She needed to get inside to stop Jack's plan. But what if she was caught? Would the doctor back her in her in her cell again? Would he rip open her seams and scatter her stuffing in the cemetery? Fortunately, her soft cotton boots barely made a creak as she unlocked the front door and climbed the castle's ramp. High up, on another floor, a saw whined to life. Sally relaxed. Dr. Finkelstein must be working in his laboratory. When he was up there, he tended to become so engrossed in his experimentation that the castle could catch on fire and burn around him, and he'd barely notice. She turned right at the top of the ramp and tiptoed to her old cell. Then she quietly lowered her to her hands and knees and used an old spoon to pry up the loose floorboards beneath her cot, where she had hidden some of the more potent poisons she'd concocted from the herbs from her cemetery garden. She lifted out the jug of frog juice and nodded to herself. This'll stop Jack. The saw whined louder from the laboratory. Sally quickly replaced the floorboard. She knew it was safest to hurry down the ramp to get out of the castle, but her curiosity got the better of her. What experiment was the doctor working on now? She'd overheard the monsters in town whispering about Finkelstein's bold new project, but had no idea what it was. Hugging the jug of frog juice, she tiptoed to the open laboratory door and carefully peeked inside. Dr. Finkelstein was leaning over a new creation strapped down to the operating table. Sally could make out little more than a cadaver's bandaged skull. What a joy to think of all we'll live in common, the doctor purred to the bandaged cadaver. He lifted his skull cap, prodded around, and then teased out a good chunk of his brain matter and inserted it into his creation's empty skull. We'll have conversations worth having. Sally fought the urge to roll her eyes. That silly old doctor. If conversation had been lacking in the past, it hadn't been Sally's fault. All Dr. Finkelstein ever wanted to talk about was electricity conduction. He placed his hands on either side of the cadaver's skull and adjusted its head to fit just right on the neck joints. Now then, Sally watched, partly in horror and partly in disgust, as the doctor leaned toward his undead companion on the operating table, his lips pursed to press a cold kiss to her new brain. But as soon as he did, the cadaver's skull cap crashed down. The doctor's lips were smashed. He let out a small wail. Sally pressed a hand over her mouth, smothering her laugh. For both of their sakes, she hoped the doctor's new companion would be a better fit for him than she had ever been. She certainly had no intention of returning to servitude. She tiptoed out of the castle, replaced the key beneath the gargoyle, and headed to the town square, determined to stop Jack. Beyond the gates of Halloween Town, the night grew cold and reeked of sulphur. As the bathtub marched through the gates and into the wilderness, Sandy Claus kicked at the bag, continuing to struggle. Me on vacation on Christmas Eve? Huh? Give me one moment, guys. I'm sorry. Beyond the gates of Halloween Town, the night grew cold and reeked of sulphur. As the bathtub marched through the gates and into the wilderness, Santa Claus kicked at the bag, continuing to struggle. Me? On vacation? On Christmas Eve? The trick-or-treaters rolled their eyes. They were growing tired of his complaints. Where are we taking him? Beryl asked Locke. Yeah, where? Shock repeated. Locke took off his mask and declared, Why, to Oogie Boogie, of course. There isn't anywhere in the world more comfortable than that. He gave a sly wink to Shock. Jack said to make him comfortable, didn't he? Yes, he did, Shock and Beryl agreed equally slyly. From inside the sack, Sandy's muffled voice admonished them. Haven't you heard of peace on earth and goodwill toward men? No. The three trick-or-treaters erupted into cackles. They led the walking bathtub up the rickety ramp into their treehouse. Once they were in the main room, they let Sandy Claus out of the bag. He took a deep breath. Don't do this, he protested. Naughty children never get any presents. This only made them laugh harder. What did they care about presents? It was the act of being naughty that was their true gift. They stuffed him head first into the chute that led down to Oogie Boogie's lair. They cackled as they prodded his backside with a plunger, a broom, and a pitchfork. The big man kicked his little feet uselessly. I think he might be too big. Shock smacked his bottom with her broom. No, he's not, Locke disagreed. If he can go down a chimney, he can fit down here. The three of them shoved their tools against his ample bottom, and with a cry, Santa Claus finally was squeezed into the chute. The metal pipes groaned as the huge man tumbled down, popping nails and threatening to burst the pipes, until at last he spilled out into the dark abyss below. He let out a hoarse yell as he landed with a thud on a circular table decorated with spikes. Oh, those naughty children! They had bound his hands with rope, and he felt like Christmas roast ready for the fork. Garish lights shone at the end of the dark cave. Santa squinted, trying to see his surroundings. The color of the room was a harsh neon blue, like nothing in his realm of snow-white, green fir trees and red candy canes. These phosphorescent lights reminded him of the plankton and blind fish that lived in the dark deep, slimy, banished things. As the neon lights grew brighter, Santa blinked a few times. Shapes of skulls and flames began to form in the darkness. They looked like parts of a game of cards or checkers, but nothing like the sweet versions his elves made. These games weren't made for children. A burst of purple light shone on the cave floor. Doors painted with a glow-in-the-dark grinning skulls opened, and two dice clattered out. They skirted across the floor until they hit Santa's beard, then rolled to a stop on the ground next to him. A sickly green light poured out of the chute overhead like a spotlight. illuminating a figure striding into the cave. Santa watched warily. Who was this fellow? He was as big as Santa himself, but appeared to be nothing more than a burlap sack roughly stitched together into the shape of a person with only a vague suggestion of hands and feet. Uneven rips in the burlap sack served as eyes and a mouth. Well, 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 what have we here? Oogie Boogie asked. His deep cackle echoed off the cave walls. There was a reason Oogie Boogie stuck to his underground lair beyond the town gates. He was so vile that even the other monsters shuddered at his presence. There had been a time when he'd tried to take over Halloween Town and crown himself the Bug King, but his creepy crawly henchmen had made a mess of everything, stealing everyone's candy corn and leaving the pumpkins to rot. Now he was king of nothing but a festering hole. Oogie Boogie shimmied into the neon green spotlight. Sandy Claus? Ooh, I'm scared. He pressed his cloth arms to his burlap cheeks as he opened his mouth in an exaggerated wail, showing off the worms that wriggled in his gums instead of teeth. Bugs tumbled out of his open mouth and landed on Santa's beard, burrowing their way into the thick white fur. As the lights grew brighter, Santa saw that the tacky neon decorations of Oogie Boogie's lair weren't symbols from board games, but rather games of chance. Gambling. Oh, what a dirty vice. Santa's elves would never make toys that encouraged gambling. He'd never dream of putting poker sets or toy slot machines under the tree. But this living burlap sack clearly felt differently. In fact, Santa realized that the circular round table beneath him wasn't a table at all, but part of a giant roulette wheel. Nearby, 3 slot machines lit up in bright colors and gave off clinking coin sounds. What poor taste and decor, Santa thought. The whole place was a cross between a torture chamber and a casino, and it all stank of mold. Oogie Boogie, with his lumpy body, sashayed around the roulette wheel, laughing huskily. He set the round table spinning, and Santa moaned as the world spun in flashing bright blues and greens. As soon as the table stopped, Oogie Boogie grabbed Santa by the tip of his head and pulled him up until they were face to face. He leaned over him, letting a spider that was hanging off the tip of his head dangle an inch above the Christmas King's nose. I'm a gambling man, Mr. Claus. I live by the roll of the dice. And you will too. Wrapping his baggy arms around Santa, he swung the large man in a series of dizzying spins as the lights flashed and seedy music played from the shadows. A yellow and black striped snake slithered out of his mouth, and it was all he could do, and it was all he had for a tongue. Santa put on his sternest face. He wasn't much of a dancer, and he certainly didn't want this burlap figure as a partner. Let me go at once. There will be a lot of disappointed children if I don't get free. Oogie Boogie howled a laugh at the ceiling of his cave, and it set loose a flock of neon winged bats. Oh, you're too much. I'm shaking. He let go of Santa and pranced around his cavern, rattling chains and crunching bones in a torture press, and then grabbed a hook dangling from the ceiling. He was relishing having something to toy with besides grubs, and he finally intended to get all the merrymaking he could out of this plump visitor. You aren't going anywhere, old man. He strung the hook between Santa's bound hands and turned a crank that lifted the Christmas King into the air on a rope, swinging him around the multicolored spotlights dancing throughout the cave. I command you to release me, Santa ordered. Oogie Boogie knocked his baggy fist on the edge of the chute that led up to his minion's treehouse. Hear that, boys? He wants free. The cackles of lock, shock, and barrel carried down the chute, spilling into the cavern, where they echoed forbiddingly. Oogie Boogie lowered the dangling Santa Claus until they could grab the man's white beard and pulled him right up to the hollow rips and tears he called a face. The monster reeked of bugs and rot. "You ain't going nowhere," Oogie Boogie said, with a throaty cackle. "You and me, we're going to play a game." Christmas Eve had arrived, the night every monster in Halloween Town had waited 14 long months for. In celebration, the undead assembly played a rousing version of "Here Comes Sandy Claus," while the two-faced mayor, wearing a poinsettia blossom pinned to his suit, conducted. For years he'd been re-elected on the promise of delivering the greatest Halloween scares of all time. But this year, ho! This year had been a real challenge with Jack's whole Christmas thing. Still, he felt confident that night would be a legendary success, which he would be sure to remind his constituents of at election time. The crowd's energy crackling in the air seemed different from the holiday eves of the past. This Christmas Eve there were no masks, no dripping blood, no severed heads, except the one that the undersea gal had packaged up with a nice black bow for some little girl or boy to open under the tree. While everyone was tapping their feet to the music and speculating about when Jack would make his grand appearance, Sally crept along the stone wall surrounding the town square with a jug of frog juice clenched to her chest. Oh, how she hoped no one would see her. It would break her heart if Jack found out she was the reason his Christmas was about to become an utter failure. He wouldn't understand it now, but she was doing what was best for him. She reached the fountain and uncorked the jug, then poured the contents into the bubbling green slime. Fortunately, the musical performance distracted everyone from the thick, gray fog that oozed out and spilled down the sides of the fountain. Back in the center of the square, the mayor waved his hand toward the coffin sleigh, which was parked on a wooden ramp. At the signal, its door creaked open. Jack appeared from inside with his arms crossed grimly over his ribs, as though he was rising from the dead. He wore the red suit Sally had made for him, along with Sandy Claus' stocking cap. The crowd cheered at their holiday king's clever entrance. He'd outdone himself again. Even though she felt his plan was foolhardy, Sally couldn't help smiling. Jack loved to make a grand entrance, even more than the mayor did. Sally slipped into the rear position of the bystanders, nodding along as though she'd been there the entire time. Not far away, thick smoke from her fog juice potion spilled out of the fountain. The fountain was connected underground to the wishing well at the far end of the square, where even more fog poured out. The mayor climbed onto the wooden ramp, which served as a makeshift stage. With his rosy face on proud display, he unfurled the speech he'd been working on for weeks and turned toward Jack. "Think of us as you soar triumphantly through the sky, outshining every star." Jack tipped his chin, basking in the praise. "Your silhouette a dark blot on the moon," the mayor effused, dramatically throwing his hands in the air. "You who are our pride, you who are our glory, you who have frightened billions into an early grave." Jack's ribcage swelled with joy. None other than he, the Pumpkin King, could have achieved this, not only making Christmas his own, but improving it and even giving Sandy Claus a much-deserved rest as part of the bargain. He couldn't wait to hear the delighted laughter of children opening their presents on Christmas morning. Everyone would marvel over the extra special changes he'd implemented that year. But a low but thick cloud of fog began to settle into the town square. Fog was nothing new in Halloween Town, so few residents paid it any bother, though it was rising unusually fast. The members of the undead ensemble began to cough. A puff of fog even slipped out of the saxophone, and the sax player grumbled. The mayor held the scroll close and squinted at the writing to see. You who have, uh, devastated the souls of the living. The crowd began to take more notice of the fog as it swallowed feet and legs. This was starting to seem unlike normal late evening fog. The cobblestone streets had completely disappeared, and fog continued to pour out of the fountain and wishing well at an alarming rate. Oh no, Jack moaned as the fog rose to chin level. We can't take off in this. The reindeer can't see an inch in front of their noses. The three skeletal reindeer hitched to his coffin sleigh weren't even visible through the thick cloud, other than a faint gleam of their bones in the moonlight. As the other monsters began to murmur worrisome to themselves, Sally wiped the back of her hand over her forehead. Whew! Her plan had worked. Now her terrifying vision wouldn't come true, and Jack would be safe. One of the vampires wailed. This fog's as thick as jellied brains, the Cyclops interjected. Thicker, cried another vampire. He should know. He'd had jellied brains for dinner just the night before. Jack sank into the driver's seat of his coffin sleigh and rested his weary chin on his hand in dejection. There goes all my hopes, my precious plans, my glorious dreams. Through the haze, he could barely make out the disappointed faces of the monsters gathered around the sleigh, though he heard the corpse kid say sullenly to his mother, There goes Christmas. Desolate cries spread among the residents. Somewhere in the haze, Zero barked. At first, Jack couldn't see the ghost dog, who had the misfortune of being the same color as the fog itself. Sadly, Jack shook his head. Wherever Zero was, it wasn't time for a fetch. No, Zero. Down, boy. A strange, warm, orange glow was cast by an orb of light somewhere in the middle of the fog, capturing Jack's attention. He cocked his skull, curious. As the orb flirted closer, he realized it was his ghost dog's pumpkin nose. My, what a brilliant nose you have, Jack observed, and then, seeing how the dog's glowing nose lit up the nearby faces of the crowd, which had previously been obscured, he grew more animated. The better to light my way. To the head of the team, Zero. The dog's ghostly body fluttered with pride as he glided to the front of the harnessed reindeer. As Zero's glowing nose grew bright enough to light up the entire crowd, they began to clap thunderously. Christmas was saved, tragedy averted. Everyone was thrilled, except for Sally, who pressed her palms against her face, shaking her head. Oh no. We're off! With a crack of his whip, Jack took his position at the head of the coffin sleigh and spurred on the cadaverous steeds. The reindeer's skulls broke into toothy smiles, hooves dancing over the ramp. They followed Zero's nose like a beacon in the darkness. The sleigh lurched forward, and Jack, exhilarated, clutched the reins and gave the crowd a heartfelt raise. The monsters shouted and cheered, urging him on. Every last ghost, zombie, and vampire wished they would be in the sleigh with the Pumpkin King. After all, in the years past, the majority of them had been part of the scaring party that trapseed into the land of the living to bring about a frightful Halloween. But this year, Jack alone would represent the town for Christmas. Over a year of wrapping boxes and weaving garlands, and to think that at the last moment it almost hadn't happened because of an unlucky fog. Thank goodness for Zero. Wait, Jack, no! Sally yelled as the sleigh pulled forward on the ramp. The memory of her awful vision clung to her like rot. The orange glow of Zero's nose looked eerily similar to the flames that had engulfed the enchanted Christmas tree in her vision. But Jack couldn't hear her above the cheering crowd, no matter how loudly she yelled. The monsters gasped as the sleigh rose into thin air. Dr. Finkelstein had done it. The reindeer flew. A large barrel in the rear of the coffin sleigh held all their handcraft gifts for the children. They watched in delight as the sleigh roared higher and higher toward the yellow moon. Jack's deep voice rang out, clear as a bell. Ho, ho, ho! Ha, ha, ha! Once the sleigh was out of sight, with it the glowing light from Zero's nose, the town was plunged back into thick fog. Now that the initial excitement was over, the residents began to find their way through the fog to Town Hall, where the Witch Sisters had set up a scrying cauldron in which they could watch Jack's midnight run. Sally remained alone in the town square, swallowed by her own fog, with her hands clutched to her chest and her chin tipped toward the sky. Goodbye, Jack, my dearest Jack. She'd done her best to prevent him from leaving, but the fog juice hadn't been enough. Oh, how I hope my premonition was wrong. She moved away from the thick fog, but didn't go to Town Hall to celebrate with the others. The undead ensemble had taken up their usual place by the cemetery gates and were playing a lovely slow dirge. She ran her soft fingers along the cemetery wall as she listened to the melody. I sense there's something in the wind, she whispered. A raspy meow stole her thoughts. A scruffy black cat slung along the top of the wall and jumped down to wind between Sally's ankles. She sighed as she spoke her fears aloud to the cat. Jack didn't listen. Now he's out there, somewhere. I'm afraid of what will happen. Through the lingering fog, the cat trotted alongside the rag doll as she strolled toward the morose music playing in the distance. I wish I could be celebrating with everyone, but I can't stop thinking about my vision. I think tonight is doomed. She leaned against the cemetery's creaky gates and let herself slide down to the scratchy grass. The cat nuzzled her, begging for affection. She stroked it gently, thinking of Jack. Will we ever end up together? She wondered aloud. It seemed as though any romance between Jack and her was not meant to be. She'd done as much as she could for him, like that little fairy she'd once thought of herself as. But he hadn't taken notice of her feelings. Maybe his heart belonged to another, or maybe it was simply not to be for the Pumpkin King and the rag doll. She nudged the cat into her lap, stroking it softly as she listened to the distant sounds of celebration. Her empty chest felt strangely heavy for one that didn't contain a heart. When the cat sprang out of her lap and ran away, leaving her alone once again, she sighed heavily. No, I think not. Jack and the skeletal reindeer soared above the clouds, following Zero's bright nose. The wind was fierce, but Jack cracked the whip, and the reindeer pushed on harder. He lifted a hand to his eyes to look for signs of life below. Aha, yes. A human town began to take shape beneath the clouds. He steered the reindeer lower until their hooves nearly brushed the rooftops as they glided along the air. These were the same houses he had lovingly terrorized on Halloween year after year, but this time he had come to deliver joy. Ho, 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 hee, hee, hee. I'm really getting the hang of this Santa thing, he thought. He skillfully glided the reindeer to land on the snow-covered rooftop, though their undead hooves slipped on the ice, and they crashed into a collection of lit-up plastic angels, which fell off the roof with a clatter and dangled from a single nail. Well, maybe a little more practice. Jack dismounted, and with considerable more grace than the sleigh had landed with, and hefted the unwieldy bag of toys onto his shoulder. How did Santa Claus do it with his bad back? Jack felt that he was much better suited for the job. He slid down the chimney with ease and tugged the sack down after him. Inside the house, a small child in an upstairs bedroom awoke to the clatter. The little boy blinked, rubbing his eyes, before he remembered. It was Christmas. The boy climbed out of bed and tiptoed down the stairs with Christmas spirit tingling throughout his body. He couldn't believe his eyes. A figure in a red suit leaned over the Christmas tree as he unpacked a sack of presents. The boy watched, mouth agape, as the figure filled his family's stockings hung over the fireplace. Santa? The boy the boy asked in wonder. Jack whirled around. A child, he thought. This was his chance. He reminded himself that this wasn't Halloween and he wasn't there to scare anyone. Instead, he gave his best toothy smile. Merry Christmas! And what is your name? He tapped the boy on the nose. The boy couldn't take his eyes off the deathly pale shade of Santa's skin. In fact, it wasn't just pale. It was bone white. Or rather, it was bone. Uh, uh, the boy was beginning to wonder if he was still asleep, because this Santa looked less like the jolly man from the North Pole and more like something out of his worst nightmares. That's all right, Jack exclaimed, using his jolliest voice. Clearly, the boy was so starstruck to see him that he'd lost his voice. I have a special present for you anyway. There you go, sonny. He reached into his sack and handed the boy a box wrapped neatly with a black satin bow, and with a wink of his eyeless socket, he launched himself backward up the chimney with a gleeful ho ho ho, he he he. Alone in his living room, the boy stared at the box. As alarming as his visit with Santa had been, a present was still a present. He unwrapped the package apprehensively as he heard the soft footsteps of his parents coming up behind him. And what did Santa bring you, honey? Asked his mother. The boy peered into the box. He would have screamed if what he saw there hadn't been less frightening than the nightmarish thing dressed in a Santa suit that had delivered it. He pulled out a shrunken head. Across town, hundreds of children awoke to the sound of hooves on their rooftops. Some noticed a strange clackety-clack sound of bones, but decided to overlook that in their excitement. The children dashed to the Christmas tree and tore open the presents they had eagerly awaited all year. Screams rang from house to house. Lights came on in each of the windows as parents woke in a cold sweat. Confused dogs barked at the spindly shadows flying high in the sky. Far above town, Jack didn't hear the screams. All he heard were the cheers he imagined would be greeting him when he returned to Halloween Town in victory. Ho, ho, ho! Ha, 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 ha! He cried in joy, oblivious to the reign of terror he was spreading. In one house, he left a man-eating holly wreath that came alive as soon as he left. In another house, a 20-foot snake slithered out of Jack's sack while his back was turned to fill the stockings. Shortly after he departed to the next house, a brother and sister awoke and eagerly scampered to the toy duck and teddy bear Jack left for them, throwing their arms around their gifts, only to flee in terror when the dolls bared their sharp teeth and chased them around the house. Mom! Dad! Help! Ah! Santa! Why? The police stations across the globe, phones began to ring. Hello? Police? A receptionist said. Attacked by Christmas toys? That's strange. That's the second toy complaint we've had. Word soon spread of the nightmare terrorizing Christmas. A Santa imposter was delivering demonic toys. Parents began to shove sofas and buffet tables in front of their chimneys to block the Santa imposter from entering. They bolted their fireplace guards with iron pokers. They turned up the gas so flames would destroy anything that tried to come down that chimney. High up on the rooftops, Jack imagined the joyful scenes that must be taking place inside all the homes he had visited. Warmth spread through his cold, desiccated heart. This would be a Christmas no one would forget. You're welcome, he called to the town far below. One and all. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Jack, phones continued to ring in police stations throughout the world faster than the receptionists could answer. Where'd you spot him? Fast as we can, ma'am. Police. I know, a skeleton. Keep calm, turn off all the lights, make sure the doors are locked. Hello, police? Back in Halloween Town, the townsfolk watched one of the news programs as it broadcast into the witch's scrying cauldron. The newscaster's face appeared thin and wan in the murky potion. Reports are pouring in from all over the globe that an impostor is shamelessly impersonating Santa Claus, mocking and mangling this joyous holiday. The monsters burst into cheers. Good old Jack. He had spread nightmares throughout the land of the living once again. The little boys and girls must be thrilled. While the witches and zombies congratulated themselves on another successful night, Sally leaned over the cauldron's edge to listen to the rest of the report. The newscasters continued grievously. Police assured us that at this moment military units are mobilizing to stop the perpetrator of this heinous crime. Sally pressed her hand to her cheek. Jack! Someone has to help Jack! The two-faced mayor was standing at her side, but he hadn't heard the rest of the report. No one had. They were all overcome with excitement. Sally gripped the edge of the cauldron. If none of the other townsfolk would help Jack, then it was up to her. She hadn't been able to detain Jack with her fog juice, and now her terrifying vision was coming true. If she didn't find a way to stop him before he delivered any more presents, then Christmas was going to end in flames, just like him in her vision. She didn't have much time. Determined, she pushed through the celebrating crowd, and she cried aloud, "Where'd they take Sandy Claus?" Back in the land of the living, Jack was making excellent time on his Christmas flight when, to his surprise, wide beams of light shone up at him. He peered down at the town far below, scratching his skull. The beams swept back and forth, just like the mayor's swinging spotlight in the town hall auditorium. That was it. Spotlights. The people below were trying to catch a glimpse of Christmas' latest celebrity. Look, Zero, searchlights. He grinned proudly. He was no stranger to the spotlight and knew how to play to his audience. He steered his sleigh in a little daredevil spin. Fireworks exploded from below. They're celebrating. Jack threw his arms in the air as more fireworks burst in the heavy clouds around them. They're thanking us for doing such a good job. He was feeling particularly pleased with himself when a firework exploded frighteningly close to the sleigh. Zero squealed in alarm and fluttered away just in time to avoid being toasted like a marshmallow. "Whoa, careful down there. You almost hit us," Jack called down. He shook his head. In their excitement, the people setting off fireworks weren't paying attention to what they were doing. Without meaning to, they might accidentally harm the very person they were trying to celebrate. Zero yipped a warning, looking pointedly at Jack. "It's okay, Zero," Jack said reassuringly. "Head higher." He tugged on the reins, and the sleigh pulled upward, deeper into the thick clouds, where they were hidden from the blasts. Putting the fireworks out of his mind, Jack consulted the list of names on Sandy's scroll. Who's next on my list? Ah, little Harry and Jordan. Won't they be surprised? As the wind shifted, the cloud cover broke apart, and Jack peered down at the snow-covered rooftops and twinkling decorations. A sudden spotlight blinded him. He recoiled, shaking his face with his hand. Those silly people were still trying to catch a glimpse of their star. Jack was starting to lose his patience with all the attention. If they kept up these spotlights and fireworks, he'd never finish his job by morning. As the clouds continued to thin, more spotlights zoned in on the sleigh. The next firework soared up so fast that Jack couldn't steer away in time. The firework slammed into one of the reindeer. Its bones shattered apart and rained down. Jack gasped as he grabbed the reins to keep the other reindeer on track, but immediately a second firework collided into the wooden barrel of toys. The barrel burst into flames. The sleigh tipped and rocked precariously, threatening to turn over. Jack struggled to grab as many flaming toys as he could salvage while trying to right the sleigh. A flaming doll in his left hand singed his finger bones, and he gasped again as a terrible realization overcame him. They wanted Jack in flames, just like the doll. "They're trying to hit us!" Oh, what a mess of things. Didn't they understand? He was trying to spread cheer, to make the children laugh and smile. "Zero!" he wailed. Now he understood what his ghost dog had been trying to warn him of. If only he'd listened. Was this what Sally had been trying to warn him of, too? Zero barked and whined as another firework zipped toward them. They aren't fireworks, Jack thought. They're missiles. The latest missile hurtled toward them, collided with the bottom of the sleigh. The entire contraption shattered. The coffin the townspeople had worked so hard on splintered into pieces. Dr. Finkelstein's reindeer broke into bones. Toys were thrown into the air, and so was Jack. As Jack fell through the clouds toward a ground that was rushing up to meet him, he cried out in a mournful wail, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." The sleigh and its passenger crashed to earth like a falling star, leaving a smoking crater in its wake. Back in Halloween Town, the townsfolk watched the events unfold in the witch's scrying cauldron. Their gasps were soon followed by tears. None of them could believe what they'd just witnessed with their own eyes, but it was undeniable. The impossible had happened. It wasn't one of Jack's clever tricks this time. The Pumpkin King was gone. The Wolfman howled his anguish up to the moon. "I knew this Christmas thing was a bad idea," the male lamented. "I felt it in my gut." He climbed into his hearse and picked up his megaphone to break the tragic news to the rest of the town. "Terrible news, folks! The worst tragedy of our times. Jack has been blown to smithereens. Terrible, terrible news." "Are you a gambling man, Santa Claus?" Deep in his lair, Oogie Boogie shook a pair of dice in a chubby Christmas king's face close enough to tickle his beard. "Let's play." Garish neon lights shone on the walls of Oogie Boogie's underground hovel. The sounds of dinging slot machines and whirling roulette tables were deafening. Dangling from the ends of a rope tied around his hands, Santa Claus wasn't sure how much more torture he could endure. Right as Oogie Boogie prepared to throw the dice, a knock on his door made him pause. Who could it be? Visitors were unheard of in his lair. Even Lock, Shock, and Barrel refused to come down from their treehouse into the pit. Oogie Boogie was unusually alone with his bugs and the occasional snake. A shapely female leg slipped between the jagged gaps of his lair's door. The owner of the leg remained coyly hidden, as though too shy to reveal herself. A dainty black boot lifted into the air tantalizingly. The cloth, the cloth that formed Oogie Boogie's lips fell open in shock. His first visitor. And what a visitor! My. What have we here? With a wiggle of his burlap eyebrows, he spit into his hand and wiped back the unruly top of his sack head before sauntering toward the door. The leg gave an extra alluring shimmy. As Oogie Boogie trapseed toward the leg, two disembodied hands crawled through the barred window, high up on the opposite side of the cave. Sally had never been so thankful for a body that could come apart with a simple tug of thread. Her hands had a mind of their own, but luckily all her various parts agreed on the same thing. Only Sandy Claus could save Jack now. While Sally's leg was distracting Oogie Boogie, her hands pushed themselves off the wall and grabbed onto the rope holding up Sandy Claus. They used their fingers to climb down the rope silently. One of her hands clapped itself over Sandy's mouth before he could scream. Another pointed upward urgently. Santa Claus followed the hand's indicated direction to see Sally outside the barred window. Her arms, which ended in stumps packed with dry leaves, clung to the bars. "I'll get you out of here," she whispered, as loudly as she dared. Her disembodied hands made quick work of untying the knot that bound Santa's hands. Meanwhile, Sally unrolled a rope ladder she had attached to the window. As quietly as he could, Santa tiptoed to the ladder and began to climb. Back at the lair's jagged door, Sally's leg was still teasing Oogie Boogie with its coy dance. "Ah, lovely," Oogie Boogie's deep voice rumbled. He ran his sack hand down the curve of the leg and tossed off its black boot with a flourish. "Tickle, tickle, tickle," he teased as he toyed with the bottom of the foot. What a delightful visitor this was. He'd booby-trapped his lair with all sorts of mechanical devices to keep unwanted guests out, but for this lovely lady he'd gladly make an exception. Oogie Boogie pulled a little too hard, and to his confusion, the leg came away in his hands. He stumbled back in an outrage as he looked at the detached ragdoll leg spilling dried leaves. "What?" he roared. He whirled around to find Sandy Claus and Sally making their escape out the window. Now he understood the trick that the rag doll had played on him with her detached leg. "You try to capture a dupe out of me." He drew in a deep, powerful breath, enough to suck up a dozen of wriggling and crawling bugs around the lair. The force of his inhale even threatened to pull Sally off the ladder. The old man clutched the rung with all his strength, but Oogie Boogie's lungs were too strong. The rope ladder tore clear off the window, dragging Sandy Claus as well as Sally back into the lair. Sally and Santa Claus were so dazed by their fall that it didn't take Oogie Boogie long to capture the two of them. He threw Sally into his Iron Maiden torture chamber, while he tied down Santa to a portion of the roulette wheel that was angled up like a plank. Sally took her needle from her hair, where she had hidden it, and quickly sewed on her disembodied hands and leg before Oogie Boogie dragged her out and tied her down on the plank next to Sandy. Oogie Boogie stood over them and cackled huskily. Try to get one over on him? Not today. Now he was especially glad he'd booby-trapped his lair, because these two visitors were definitely unwelcome. "You wait until Jack hears about this," Sally cried. "By the time he's through with you, you'll be lucky if you—" Her threat was interrupted by the sound of the mayor's megaphone coming from somewhere outside. The mayor's voice filtered through the window. "The King of Halloween has been blown to smithereens. Skeleton Jack is now a pile of dust." Oogie Boogie's cloth mouth pulled back into a devilish grin. This was the best news he'd heard in months. He rattled a pair of dice in his hands. "What's that you were saying about luck, Ragdoll?" Santa Claus shook his head in sorrow. Sally gasped. "Not Jack." In the land of the living, Jack Skellington lay broken and battered on a cold gray statue, surrounded by snow and fire. A policeman's voice cut through the night on a nearby patrol car's speaker. "Attention citizens, terrible news. There's still no sign of Santa Claus. Although the imposter has been shot down, it looks like Christmas will have to be canceled this year. I repeat, the imposter has been shot down, but there's still no sign." The voice faded as the police car turned down a road and took it in another direction. To Jack, the words came as though in a half-forgotten dream. Imposter? Cancelled. Shot down. Was he dead again? For the first time he died had been so long ago he couldn't even recall what had killed him. Ah, well, whatever it had been, it couldn't possibly have been worse than this. This death was icy cold. It was darkly bleak. It was— A faint bark made him blink his eye sockets open. "Maybe I'm not dead after all," he thought, "though I might as well be." He looked around to discover that he was sprawled in the middle of a snow-covered cemetery. Gravestones rose like petrified dragon scales out of the darkness. Pieces of broken sleigh were scattered everywhere. Zero floated over with Jack's jawbone clutched in his mouth and affixed it back into his skull. Even though and Jack had survived the crash, Zero's nose had lost its glow as the dog felt the depths of his friend's sorrow. Jack tested out his jawbone to make sure it worked. He sat up slowly on the large tablet-like tablet-like open book held out by a stone angel who had broken his fall. His Sandy Claus suit was in tatters. Soot soaked his face. Broken bones would heal, but how could he ever repair the damage he'd done to the world? All around the cemetery, the ruins of the sleigh smoldered in the snow. The toys his town's residents had spent months crafting were quickly becoming nothing but ash. How fitting that his flight would end in a cemetery where his greatest hopes would be buried forever. What have I done? He moaned. The rest of his skull, or he rested his skull in his hands, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. How could he have been so wrong? How had everything ended up such a mess? All he'd wanted to show them, something he'd never seen before, to dazzle them. He flopped back onto the angel's statue's open book, with a hand pressed against his forehead. Poor Jack, he thought, pitying himself. Bury me, Zero, he moaned. I want to be dead and gone. He could picture his headstone now. Here lies poor old Jack. Zero floated aimlessly around his companion as the wrecked toys continued to smolder. He didn't even pick up a piece of broken tricycle for fetch. Jack's sigh deepened. Oh well, I tried, didn't I? Then he suddenly sat up again. The rising flames and the cool night air were stirring his bones back to life. Yes, he had tried, and he'd come so close. Who else could boast such a feat? Zero's nose began to glow again, faintly. As the spotlights continued to sweep overhead, Jack's spine straightened. Yes, I tried. And you know what? For a while there, I did dazzle. I flew among the stars, and oh, the stories they'll have to tell their children. Tales of the most memorable Christmas ever. He curled his hand into a triumphant bony fist. He jumped down from the statue, testing out his bruised bones as he strode among the flaming wreckage. I'm starting to feel like myself again. He leapt onto a tombstone. His bones were starting to remember what it felt like to leap, to dance, to jump from gravestone to another, growing more excited. He had never meant to spread cheer. He had never been meant to spread cheer. He was meant to sow terror, to haunt children's dreams, to rouse goosebumps. He jumped on the back of a bench and let it fall backward as he gracefully sprang onto another statue. Then he ripped off the red suit to reveal his black and white pinned Halloween suit beneath. He howled up at the night, I'm Jack, the Pumpkin King. He cackled as he cavorted beneath the spotlights sweeping overhead. His bones had forgotten what they were for a short time, but now they remembered. He tested out a few of his old prize-winning scare faces. I have the best idea for all new scares. His arms stretched toward the moon as Zero floated over, holding the Santa hat in his jaws. Jack's arms suddenly fell. All his renewed confidence moved aside in one fell swoop as he remembered everyone waiting for him back in Halloween Town. There was no telling what those rascals, Lock, Shock, and Barrel, had done to poor old Sandy Claus. Jack needed to get to Oogie Boogie's lair before it was too late. Oh no, I hope there's time to set things right. Tucking the Sandy Claus hat into his suit's inner pocket, he threw open a trapdoor at his feet of the angel statue and dove into a dark tunnel within. Come on, Zero, Jack called back to his dog. Christmas isn't over yet. Jack and Zero rushed out of the tunnel to find themselves back in Halloween Town Cemetery. They charged through the gates, over hills and around trees at the edge of the hinterland forest. In the distance, lights blazed in Oogie Boogie's lair. Jack felt an awful premonition in his bones. Help! Help! That was Sally's voice. Those little troublemakers Lock, Shock, and Barrel hadn't taken good care of Sandy Claus at all. As Jack had feared, they'd taken him, and Sally too, straight to Oogie Boogie. Jack raced across the unsteady bridge that led to Trick-or-Treater's tree house, but stopped short when he heard Oogie Boogie's deep voice rumbling below. He placed a finger to his mouth, hushing Zero. Looks like it's Oogie's turn to boogie now, Oogie Boogie said, cackling within his lair. Sally screamed. Jack took hold of the rope. that held up the elevator cage and lowered himself until he could see into the pit. Oogie Boogie had constructed a makeshift roof out of tin paneling with a few barred windows. Inside the lair, Sally and Sandy Claus were tied down to an angled plank. The center of the roulette wheel was open and revealed a fiery vat of magma. An enormous 8-ball attached to claw-like rotating blades was poised over the lava, stirring it to keep it from hardening. Jack continued to descend until he reached one of the lair's windows and squeezed his narrow frame through its iron bars. Oogie Boogie rolled a pair of dice and clapped in ecstasy as they showed the numbers 3 and 4. With both hands he grabbed a crank attached to the plank and began to pull it back. 1, 2, 3, he said, cackling as he cranked it 3 times. The plank began to tilt. Sally and Sandy started sliding toward the vat of boiling lava, and Sally let out another wail. Oogie Boogie snickered as he cranked faster. 4, 5, 6, 7. The plank angled even more. This can't be happening, Sandy Claus moaned. Oogie Boogie let go of the crank and frolicked around the oversized roulette wheel like a schoolchild singing nursery rhymes. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. Ooh, I'm feeling weak with hunger. One more roll for the dice ought to do it. As Oogie Boogie picked up his dice to throw again, Jack crept into the lair like a spider, silent and deadly, keeping to the shadows. Oogie Boogie threw the dice. This time they landed in a skeleton's hollow skull, rolled down its throat, tumbled out its ribcage. Oogie Boogie checked the numbers on the dice. 1, 1. What? Oogie Boogie thundered in fury. Snake eyes! There was no way 2 measly clanks was going to do the job. At that rate, the prisoners would die of old age before falling into the lava. Angry, he thumped his fist on the table hard enough to send the dice flying. When they settled again, new numbers showed. 11, Oogie Boogie declared, with a chortle. Now that's more like it. Looks like I won the jackpot. Bye-bye, Dollface and Sandman. He threw his weight against the lever, and the plank tipped dangerously. Sally screamed as she and Sandy lost their balance. They tried to hold onto the plank, but it was useless with their hands bound. They both slid toward the vat of lava and disappeared. Oogie Boogie guffawed as he pretended to revel in their screams. Jack wasn't the only one who could inspire a good shriek. The sound of screams was music to his ears. He frowned. For some reason, his victims' screams had stopped as soon as they had begun. His prisoners couldn't have died that fast. He'd thrown enough beetles into the vat to know that lava took a while to burn through a creature. What the? He peered into the vat, but didn't see any sign of the rag doll or the bearded man. No bones. No red hair. Confused, he lifted the plank back up to see if something had gone wrong with the machinery underneath, and was flabbergasted to find a snappily dressed skeleton reclined on the other side. Oogie Boogie recoiled in horror. Jack Skellington. That ghoul. He must have somehow helped Sally and Sandy Claus escape before they fell into the vat and burned to death. Hello, Oogie, Jack said coolly. Jack! Oogie Boogie clutched his baggy hands together as he backed away. But they said you were dead. You must be... He pretended to shiver in fright as he moved away from the skeleton. Then he slyly smashed his foot against a spider-shaped button that was hidden on the floor. Another one of his tricks. Double dead. Oh! Jack cried as the roulette wheel began to rotate. Heat and flames flared up from the pit, where Sally and Sandy had almost met their ends. Life-size playing cards on mechanical springs popped up around the perimeter of the wheel, wielding sharp iron knives, trapping Jack. In the center, the 8-ball's claw-like blades extended and spun like churning mixers of a blender. With spider-like reflexes, Jack dropped to all fours, contorting to stay beneath the blade's reach. Oogie Boogie pranced to the far side of the roulette wheel, laughing huskily as he taunted Jack. Well, come on, Bone Man. Oogie Boogie hadn't planned on having so many visitors that night. It was practically a soiree, but he was game for a surprise, especially if it meant he could slash and mash the Pumpkin King into pumpkin pie. Zero barked ferociously outside the window to Oogie Boogie's lair. At the sound of Zero's barking, Sally and Sandy Claus peeked out from behind the Iron Maiden torture device where they'd taken shelter. Jack knew all about Oogie Boogie's love for games of chance, but he had no idea what exactly Oogie Boogie had spent years constructing down there in his underground lair. Oogie Boogie's roulette wheel was a cruel gauntlet designed by a rotten mind. The spinning wheel was rimmed with macabre symbols on the ball pockets, skulls mixed in with hearts, spades, and diamonds. Pumpkin-colored light emanated from the vat at the base of the wheel, and Jack kept slipping on the wheel's slope, sliding closer and closer to the lava. The life-size playing cards whirled their mechanical knives in a deadly onslaught, but Jack expertly judged the distance and leapt over each one with grace and cunning. Eh? Oogie Boogie grunted, dismissing Jack's feats with a wave of his hand. Bored by Jack's ability to dodge his obstacles, he pulled a cord to transform the roulette wheel into an even deadlier game. The playing cards lowered back into the rotating roulette base. Jack had to march fast to keep up with the wheel's speed so as not to be sucked into the lava. In the dark recess of the cavern, three sets of eyes glowed to life. Whoever they belonged to seemed even taller than Jack. The clanking and churning sounds of machinery grew louder as an installation of three slot machines, gliding forward on metal tracks, appeared out of the smoke. Each machine was topped with a skull with glowing eyes and had, instead of a lever to pull for a prize, a mechanical arm topped with a pistol. Fire! Oogie Boogie ordered his machines. The lair filled with the deafening sounds of clanking coins and bells. The robotic slot machines lowered their levers toward Jack. They fired. Bam, bam, bam. Jack sprang up from the spinning floor, his long legs arching over the gunshots. Instead of running away from the armed slot machines, he charged them with a snarl, jumping right on top of their mechanical arms and dancing on them in a taunting jitterbug. They'd never shoot him now. Oogie Boogie glowered in frustration. That skinless collection of bones was outsmarting his games of chance. Well, good thing he'd rigged all the games. The house always won, and this was his house. Time to up the ante. Oogie Boogie used the wheel's momentum to launch himself off the roulette floor with a gleeful whee! As soon as he flew off the wheel, he smacked his hand on a skull-shaped button. It was the trigger to launch a rotating saw from the ceiling. The saw's previous victim, nothing but bones now, was wired on to the saw like a stuntman on a carnival wheel. The rotating saw arched down from the ceiling on a giant retractable arm, heading straight for Jack. Jack was so close to the loud gunshots of the slot machine that he didn't hear the saw bearing down on him. Oogie Boogie danced from foot to foot in excitement as he watched the blade lower toward Jack. The pot was about to get a lot sweeter. "Jack, look out!" Sally shouted. At her cry, Jack turned and caught sight of the spinning blades closing in. He threw himself off the slot machines a second before the saw cut into them. Sparks flew everywhere. The pistols were sawn clean off and clattered to the floor. Jack landed on the spinning roulette wheel across from Oogie Boogie. He gave the Bug King his best Halloween scare face, and the festering sack flailed his arms in the air. But as soon as the shock wore off, Oogie Boogie slammed his hand down on one of the rigged roulette panels, which hid a secret springboard. It shot him upward, where he grabbed on the pole, holding the rotating claw-like blades, though in the commotion a small string had caught from his burlap sack body on a screw and now began to unravel. "So long, Jack! Ha ha ha!" He waved his arms tauntingly as he laughed. The loose string dangled toward the game of chance. "How dare you treat my friends so shamefully?" Jack admonished him. He grabbed Oogie Boogie's fluttering string and gave it a taut tug. To Oogie Boogie's horror, the string pulled loose from his burlap skin. His lumpy sack body had served him perfectly well, but now he was realizing that his stitches were much too loose, and mostly composed of knots that easily unraveled with a simple tug. The seam split open from the tip of his hand to his flappy underarm. Inside, hundreds of squiggly bugs wiggled from the sudden freedom. Worms, beetles, spiders, grubs, moths, centipedes, every type of creepy crawly beast in Halloween Town had been stuffed into that sack, and they clung together to make the creature called Oogie Boogie. Oogie Boogie gave a few desperate cries as he tried to hold together the open seam, but bugs continued to spill out, tumbling down into the lava with tiny shrieks. The dangling string caught on the rotating blades beneath the 8-ball and, before Oogie Boogie could free it, became a giant tangle. With a rip, the entire burlap sack was sucked into the rotating blades. Completely exposed, Oogie Boogie was nothing but a mass of wriggling bugs. Thousands of them pulsated in the form of the Bug King, scrambling to maintain their shape, but slipping and falling regardless. Oogie Boogie dramatically raised a hand to his brow and clung to a rope with the other. "Now look what you've done!" Without his burlap skin, his face was nothing but gaping holes for his mouth and eyes, and a striped purple beetle for a nose. As the bugs lost their hold and fell, Oogie Boogie's shape began to diminish. "My bugs!" he wailed. "My bugs!" His throaty voice transformed into a high-pitched lament of hundreds of tiny cries as the creature that had been Oogie Boogie broke apart. "My bugs! My bugs!" Sally and Santa Claus came out from their hiding spot with mouths agape to behold the end of Oogie Boogie. Overhead, Zero found a gap in the window sill and floated in, his nose shining brightly. "My bugs!" A slimy green caterpillar wiggled across the floor, only to end its miserable life smashed beneath Santa's heavy foot. Santa ground his boot into the cave floor with a grimace. "That's what you get," Santa thought, "for being naughty." After dusting himself off, Jack sheepishly handed the Christmas King his red cap. "Forgive me, Mr. Claus. I'm afraid I've made a terrible mess of your holiday." Santa gave Jack a look of paternal disapproval. "Bumpy sleigh ride, Jack," Santa snapped as he snatched his cap. "Next time you get the urge to take over someone else's holiday, I'd listen to her." He jabbed his finger toward Sally, who was lingering shyly behind the Iron Maiden. "She's the only one who makes any sense around this insane asylum." Sally smiled softly. Grumbling to himself, Santa placed his red cap firmly on his scalp. His poor head had been chilled for hours, and Mrs. Claus would have baked him into a pie if he'd lost his cap that she had knit for him. Balling his fists and thinking of the long night's work ahead of him, he stomped towards the exit while grumbling, "Skeletons." "I hope there's still time," Jack called after him. Santa stopped abruptly and spun around. "To fix Christmas? Of course there is. I'm Santa Claus." He pressed his index finger to the side of his nose, gave Jack one more disapproving glare, and then, with a twinkle of magic, flew straight up to the air through lock, shock, and barrel's chute. It was still snug, but with a little extra magic he squeezed through. Watching Santa Claus disappear through the chute, Jack felt remorse and relief mingled together inside his ribcage. Everything would soon be back to how it should be, so why did he still get the sense that something was left unfinished? Sally moved out from the shadows. He'll fix things, Jack. He knows what to do. She, tus- she touched his wrist gently. Jack looked at her hand touching him and asked incredulously, "How did you get down here, Sally?" A wave of shyness overcame her. She looked at her hands, toying with her soft fingers. "Oh, I was just trying to. Well, I wanted to. To help me," Jack prompted. She looked away as her phantom heart pattered faster in her chest. "I couldn't just let you." "Sally." Jack raised a bony hand on her shoulder and turned her gently toward him. He pressed his other hand against his chest. At last he was starting to form an inkling of what he'd been missing in his life. All this time he had thought he'd simply grown bored of Halloween, but that hadn't been it at all. He said, "I can't believe I've never realized that you—" They moved imperceptibly closer to each other, as though drawn together by a string connecting them. Jack hadn't noticed that the thread on her face was a different color from the string that held together the rest of her body, or that beneath her autumn leaf scent she also smelled of oleander. There was so much he didn't know about Sally, but he wanted to. "Jack! Jack!" Someone called from the barred window as a bright spotlight flooded down on them. Peering up into the light, Jack shaded his eyes. It was the mayor of Halloween Town, along with Lock, Shock, and Barrel. "There he is!" Barrel cried. "Alive!" Lock added. "Just like we said," Shock insisted, holding the searchlight. The mayor wore the smiling side of his face, but not even the maniacal grin could convey the depths of his excitement. Jack was back. He wasn't a broken pile of bones. The mayor quickly lowered a rope. "Grab a hold, my boy." The knotted rope unrolled to the bottom of the cave. Jack clutched the rope with one hand and took Sally's hand with his other. She felt light in his grasp, like a dream. "Hey, Cloudy." "Whoa!" Jack and Sally cried in unison as they were hoisted up to safety. In the world of the living, bulletins spread reports of the impostor's arrest and Santa Claus' return. Broadcasters were anxious to put their listeners' fears to rest. "Good news, folks," reporters said. "Santa Claus, the one and only, has finally been spotted. Old St. Nick appears to be traveling at supersonic speed. He's setting things right, bringing joy and cheer wherever he goes." Santa Claus drove his team of reindeer swiftly from house to house, squeezing down chimneys to capture the demonic toys Jack had delivered and replace them with the sweet presents boys and girls had put on their lists. He snatched up the evil jack-o'-lantern in the box the witches had cursed to attack a husky boy with glasses, and gave the child a candy cane instead. He caught the possessed gumshot-ridden duck and flying vampire Teddy, which had cornered the brother and sister in their bedroom, and left a toy sailboat and a stuffed pink bear in their place. He took the shrunken head from the wide-eyed boy in plaid pajamas, whose parents had passed out from shock, and gave the child a waggy-tailed puppy wrapped in a bow. A newscaster continued, "Yes, folks, Kris Kringle has pulled it out of the bag and delivered Christmas to excited children all over the world." The good news reflected in the witch's sister's scrying cauldron, but none of the Halloween Town residents heard it. The witches slumbered on the floor of their cottage. When they'd heard the tragic news of Jack's death, they'd burst into tears and prodded everyone out with their broomsticks. The monsters had shambled through town, wailing like banshees as they listened to the mayor's lament over his megaphone while he drove up and down the streets. Almost all the residents of Halloween Town cried themselves to sleep, from the undersea gal asleep in the murky fountain water to the vampires hanging upside down in their attic. Only the undead ensemble still haunted the streets, with a dirge for the fallen Pumpkin King. Now the witches twinkled awake at the sound of a car horn honking emphatically. They sat up, removing their eye masks to reveal eyes puffy and red from mourning. They exchanged looks. The horn sounded like it belonged to the mayor's hearse, but instead of sobbing into his megaphone, now the mayor was honking in excited bursts. Could it be? Could the mayor have some good news? The witches tossed off their blankets and freshened up by rubbing extra dirt in their fingernail beds. They wanted to look their best in case Jack was back from the dead. In town, the gatekeeper yawned awake and lit his lantern when he saw the dark hearse bumping through the hinterlands. He hurried to raise the gate. The sounds of honking and the excited speculation of townsfolk carried through the streets, awaking every resident of Halloween Town. The Cyclops threw open his shutters at the top story of an angular stone cottage. From his vantage point, he could see the mayor's car approaching the gate with several figures inside. "Jack!" he cried. "Jack's back!" The undersea gal propped up from her slime bath in the fountain. She blew slime out of her gills. Jack? The winged demon who had just woken and was hanging upside down on the fountain's spout threw open his wings. "Jack's okay!" The mayor's hearse joyfully chugged into the town square as its sleepy residents woke, rubbed their eyes, hurried to pull on their clothes, and rushed out to meet the mayor's hearse. "He's all right!" cried the creature under the stairs. With Sally seated next to him, the mayor parked in front of the town hall and shut off the jack-o'-lantern-shaped headlights. Lock, shock, and barrel tumbled down from the top of the hearse, talking excitedly about their brave battle with Oogie Boogie to anyone who would listen. The mayor immediately began shaking hands. Sally remained in the front seat of the hearse, enjoying the excitement of the crowd. Everyone only had eyes for Jack. In his black pinstripe suit, Jack Skellington had never looked more dashing. He descended from the top of the hearse, bowed deeply to the crowd, and started up the steps to Town Hall. Laughter and joyous cries rang out around him. The corpse kid clung to his leg, beaming up at him with his rotting smile. He'd told Jack on more than one occasion that he wanted to be just like him when he grew up, and Jack had assured the boy that his flesh would fall off his bones soon enough, and he'd grow up to be a fine skeleton, too. Jack reached the top of the stairs, where the mayor was already waiting for him. Jack tossed the corpse kid into the air for good luck before placing him atop the mayor's oversized hat, then gave the mayor a solid handshake. The mayor was always talking about them being a team. Jack had never felt prouder to call either one of his two faces a friend. "It's great to be home," Jack announced. Everyone broke into applause. Jack beamed as he looked over his friends and neighbors. Yes, this was indeed where he belonged, among the dark, dismal, woefully terrifying creatures of the night. He would never again question his place in this eerie world. Far from the distance, a deep "ho, ho, ho" carried on the wind. The Halloween town folk tipped their chins up toward the velvet black. The moon was fat and full. The silhouette of a sleigh and 8 reindeer crossed its face. "Happy Halloween!" Santa Claus called down to them. Jack lifted a hand and waved, and answered, "Merry Christmas!" Jack was pleased to know there were no hard feelings. Holiday kings had to stick together, after all. He would never be able to take over another holiday again. But there would come a time when he needed Sandy's help. One day he might be too sick to lead the scare team to the land of the living on October 31st. Sandy Claus or the giant pink bunny might have to don a ghost costume and lead the hauntings for him. The night slowly filled with tiny white speckles. The townspeople gazed up in wonder. What were those bright spots? Were they stars? They had never been stars above Halloween Town before. Their nights were a thick, unbroken smear of black, except for the light of the moon. But these stars were falling. They fluttered down in icy waltzes. All right, see you, Omar. "What's this?" the corpse kid asked, catching a flake in the rotting palm of his hand. "What's this?" Dr. Hyde echoed, equally befuddled. The mayor stuck out his tongue to catch a flake. At the icy zap, his head immediately rotated to the happy side. Despite none of the Halloween Town residents ever having experienced snow, the magic in the air drew smiles on their faces. The townspeople began to frolic and play. The lake at the edge of town froze over into smooth ice, and the vampires pasted knife blades onto the bottom of their shoes and wobbled onto the ice, skating around like happy, clumsy children. They used their umbrella handles like hockey sticks to pass a pumpkin back and forth. At the edge of the lake, Behemoth and the undersea gal flopped onto their backs in a deep snowdrift and waved their arms and legs to make funny shapes. Behemoth thought they looked like angels in the snow, but the undersea gal scoffed and insisted the wide wings clearly made them snowbats. A snowball flew through the air and smacked Jack right in his eye cavity. He spun in surprise and wiped away the snow. When he saw Lock, Shock, and Barrel giggling as they hid behind the frozen fountain, he tipped back his skull and laughed heartily. He couldn't stay mad at those scamps for long. Even if they had caused trouble for him, Oogie Boogie was only a memory now, and as far as Jack was concerned, so was his ire. The simple truth was that Jack was exactly where he belonged. He was a creature of the night, a fearsome ghoul. He, Jack Skellington, was the Pumpkin King. Moving away from the crowd, Sally watched or wandered to the gates outside Jack's house and plucked a thistle from the same clump she had admired before. She twirled it between her fingers, studying it closely in the snowfall as she strolled through town. Oh, how she hoped there would be no more visions, no more fire, unless it was on a candle of the jack-o'-lantern. The familiar whine of Dr. Finkelstein's wheelchair made her look up in surprise. The evil scientist, accompanied by the female creation he had been working on so diligently in his laboratory, wheeled into the town square. "Careful, my precious jewel," he purred to his companion. Sally spied on them from a distance. She didn't run away this time. She was done fleeing. She had her sewing and had made good friends with the hanging tree. Besides, Dr. Finkelstein had a new companion now. The latest animated corpse was Sally's opposite in every way. The new assistant, dressed in an expensive fur stole and pearl necklace, was all hard bone and freakish angles. A female version of the doctor himself? Sally thought with a laugh. From the opposite side of Town Square, Jack also gaped at the appearance of Dr. Finkelstein and his uncanny female double. Well, he's finally made his match, Jack thought. Sally was never right for him. She's far too curious, too clever, too kind. Speaking of Sally, where was she? Jack's chest swelled as he thought of the rag doll who had come to his rescue. When he'd seen her in danger in Oogie Boogie's lair, he had felt a slice of fear that cut far deeper than his concern for his other fellow citizens. Sally had been there in the shadows so often, just behind the scenes, sprinkling magic dust to help him on whatever quest beckoned him. He recalled her delivering the basket of absinthe and provisions, making his Sandy Claus costume, sneaking into Oogie Boogie's lair to save Sandy Claus. She'd even tried to warn him, but he hadn't listened. What a fool he'd been. Would she ever forgive him? He finally caught sight of her slipping through the town gates. Where was she going? Why wasn't she celebrating with everyone else? He'd made such a mess of things. But now all he desired was to tie up the final loose threads. And there was one thing he still had to put right. Sally climbed the top of Spiral Hill, searching for a moment of respite away from the unruly partiers. She clutched the thistle in one hand. Fortunately, it hadn't burst into flames as part of another vision. It was simply a flower. She sighed to herself as she plucked off the petals in the moonlight. He loathes me. He loathes me not. He loathes me. He loathes me not. She heard soft footsteps behind her and turned with a gasp. It was Jack. Jack Skellington had entered the cemetery and now stood at the bottom of Spiral Hill with a hand pressed to his chest. "My dearest friend," he called up to her, "may I join you?" Her stitched mouth tugged into a smile. Jack climbed the snow-covered hill slowly, taking his time on the most important step of setting things right. At the top, he extended a bony hand to her. She took his hand in her own cloth one. For so long she'd been shy around the Pumpkin King, but something seemed different now. Maybe it was the Christmas magic Jack was always talking about, or maybe it was a different kind of magic the two of them had summoned on their own. She felt the tingle of another premonition, a lovely one this time. "Come be with me, my dearest Jack," she whispered. They clasped hands beneath the moon, while Zero floated happily amid the icicles clinging to the underside of Spiral Hill. "Sally, it's clear now that," Jack started. "We're simply meant to be," she finished. They found each other in an embrace beneath the moon. Sally's cloth lips brushed a tender kiss against Jack's mouth. Her soft arms surrounded his angular shoulders. The snow had stopped falling, but Jack felt that the world now held more magic than ever before. He thought back to the previous Halloween, when all the cheers and merriment from another successful holiday hadn't bolstered his spirits as it reliably had in the past. He'd felt something was missing in his life, like a hole in his undead heart. But all this time, it wasn't change he'd been searching for. It wasn't a different holiday or a town with holly wreaths decorating front porches instead of jack-o'-lanterns. What he'd been desperately scourging the world for had been right in front of him the whole time. Sally had filled the hole in his heart with well wishes and delicious treats, and then she had mended the hole with her gentle courage. Sally, unlike Jack, didn't spare a thought for the past as they held each other. She leaned her head against the Pumpkin King's bony shoulder and let herself dreamily live in the present. Her affection for Jack had been growing like the flowers in her cemetery garden, starting as shy seeds, flourishing with every look and kind word, and now bursting into bloom. She imagined the great future of never again being locked away in Dr. Finkelstein's castle, and being free to explore and dance and celebrate, just like all the townsfolk, with her and Jack always there for each other through the darkest of nights. As they stood gazing at each other, Zero flew off into the sky, his pumpkin nose shining as brightly as the first star ever to look down on the land of nightmares. That night, every resident of Halloween Town fell asleep to a soft melody being performed by the Undead Ensemble, which played a serenade for Jack and Sally and everyone who treasured the beautiful darkness of Halloween. And that is the end of Nightmare Before Christmas. So what did everyone think? But anyway, I think we're gonna raid Sagril. So thank you guys for listening in, and I will should be able to see you guys tomorrow when Sagril and I play Monster Hunter. So see you guys all later. Ta ta for now.